Okay, this video will be the starting point for Chapter 14, which is looking at the nature and operation of aggregate supply-side policies. So some key things you'll need to know for Chapter 14. First of all, what is meant by aggregate supply-side policies and what are the key aims of aggregate supply-side policies. Some different types, so we will look at aggregate supply-side policies implemented in the budget, microeconomic reform policies, structural reforms, which aren't actually a form of aggregate supply policy, and industry assistance, which is also a form of aggregate supply-side policy. So we were looking at the major aims of aggregate supply-side policies, recapping the difference between productivity and efficiency, how supply-side policies can help and hinder each of the specific goals, as well as how they can help and hinder living standards, examples of supply-side policies in this year's budget, which we've already covered really, and examples of things what we call industry policy, microeconomic reform policy, and structural reform policies. So, when you're looking at aggregate supply-side policies, there's two really key things you need to know. First of all, they refer to any government initiative that's designed to reduce firms' cost of production and improve supply-side conditions in the economy. So whenever you're referring to an aggregate supply-side policy, you need to be able to demonstrate two things. And the first one is how that particular policy is likely to improve efficiency. So how is what they're doing in this instance likely to lead to increased productivity or increased efficiency? So if you're talking, for example, about lower income taxes, how are lower income taxes going to encourage the incentive for people to join the workforce? How are they going to make people more productive? And how is that going to provide benefits for the economy? And secondly, how the resulting improvement in efficiency or productivity is likely to feed on through increased living standards and help us to achieve all of our other government goals and living standards. So the definition of aggregate supply is just the total amount of goods and services available for sale in an economy. So if you get asked to define aggregate supply, that's all that means, the total amount of goods and services available for sale in an economy. Increasing aggregate supply is basically about trying to improve our productive capacity. So if we can improve our productive capacity, that helps us to improve our long-term aggregate supply. And that can be done by either increasing the amount of productive resources. So what we mean by that is getting access to new natural resources, access to new labour resources, whether that be through boosting our participation rates or immigration, or getting access to new capital resources and technology. So we can either boost our productive capacity by one, increasing the amount of productive resources, or two, increasing the efficiency with which we use our available resources. So what I mean by that is, there's already people in Australia. Rather than increasing immigration, we can just improve the skill level of our current workforce. And that way we can produce more from any given set of resources. So we improve aggregate supply by either improving what we call the quantity or the quality of our resources. So think of it as the two Qs. Improving the quantity by getting access to more natural labour or capital resources, or improving the quality of our resources by improving skill levels, improving productivity, things like that. So just one key quote whenever you're talking about supply-side policies. Productivity is the most significant driver of an economy's growth. Productivity improvements enable for more or better goods and services to be produced with the same amount of resources, result in higher profits, results in higher profits and in the long term better wages for people. So what's critical to understand is that if we want to be competitive in the long term, we've got to boost our productivity. That will allow for lower prices. It will mean people will want our goods and services, and it can help to counter the effects of the fact that our terms of trade is falling and we have an ageing population. So if we don't improve productivity, Australia is not going to remain internationally competitive. That's the only way we can improve our living standards in light of the fact that commodity prices are falling and we have an ageing population. So whenever we are in a recession or we're in a period of weak growth, the government can use either demand or supply side policies. So we've talked about the demand policies. The last 7 weeks we've been looking at budgetary policy and monetary policy and how they can have an impact on the demand side of the economy. So for example, reducing interest rates to stimulate borrowing and investment, or cutting taxes to try and stimulate spending. Now we're going to look at essentially the other thing that they can do, which is about increasing aggregate supply. And the idea of increasing aggregate supply is that it helps to boost our productive capacity and lower costs of production, and therefore helps to satisfy the extra demand that exists in the economy. So it allows us to achieve strong economic growth, strong employment without causing high inflation. And that's going to improve our living standards going forward. So even though these ones will shift the aggregate demand curve and they're all about boosting aggregate demand, these are supply-side policies that are going to lead to a shift in the supply curve, and as a result of that lead to more aggregate demand. So what I mean by that is we're looking at trying to boost our aggregate supply potential, which will allow for increased national income, and national income is the x-axis. So the further we are on the x-axis, the increased level of national income and real GDP, at lower prices. So not only higher output, but at lower prices, which is critical for our long-term international competitiveness and sustainable growth. We can't achieve sustainable growth unless we're able to push out our aggregate supply so we can meet any extra aggregate demand. Because if aggregate demand was to increase, we'd be better off meeting that at a lower price as opposed to where we would be if we didn't boost our aggregate supply. Video 2 will look at some specific aggregate supply policies.